The separation of church and state has long defined American democracy, but in Texas, new efforts from Bible-infused school lessons to Ten Commandments displays and proposals for prayer in classroom are sparking debate over whether that line is being crossed. Joining us to explore the history and the movement is Nancy Beck Young, Moore's Professor of History at the University of Houston. Professor Young, welcome to Hello Houston.
Hello, Ernie. Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you. And if you'd like to join into the conversation or call or text us at 713-440-8870. I guess the first place to start here would be, are we over-sensationalizing what's happening, or should we be concerned?
I do think there is reason to be concerned. We have a long history in the United States going back to the Constitution and other words of our founders that church and state were to be separate entities. And I think the concern is not along the lines of somebody's breaking into my house, I must do something now, sort of thing, but this could be dangerous. We could be on a slippery slope. So it's more of the slippery slope type concern than an imminent threat. But I guess I would start out by reminding listeners of what the First Amendment to the Constitution says about religion. And I'll quote, "Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof." So that means the government can't say you must go to this church and you can't go to that church or anything in between or along that continuum. The government can't tell us where to worship, how to worship, or to prohibit us from worshiping, which is just as important.
The argument that would come back is, if you're saying you can do these things can be present, isn't saying you can't do other things. So therefore, they're not prohibiting other religion, but they are sharing one.
As in the case of what is happening here in Texas now?
Yeah.
Yeah, perhaps, but here is where the problem with that lies. Texas is a very diverse place with multiple faith traditions represented. And what about the child who is not growing up in a Protestant household or a Jewish household or a Catholic household, things that in the United States we think of as the stand-ins for religion, but is from a Muslim background or Hindu background, or the list goes on. Where does that leave the child as he or she navigates the day of school with their friends? We all know kids can be quite mean to those who are viewed as different. And I worry about what this trend will mean for people who don't fit into the Judeo-Christian traditions.
So, Nancy, given, when we look at the term separation of church and state, and based on what you just read and explained to us, is the concept of separation of church and state more of a concept or like a metaphoric wall that essentially is stopping the government from establishing a singular religion? Because it seems like it's very open to interpretation.
Yes, yes. Well, that's the thing with words. They often do leave the door open for interpretation. That also keeps people like me employed, so I don't have a problem with that. But yes, the wording in the First Amendment does not say specifically you cannot do these 5 things and then enumerate those 5 things. Our Constitution is an elastic document, And that's that's good because it does allow for interpretation to change with the passage of time. So I guess I am more on the elasticity side than the wall side. But that said, we do have 200 plus years of history of not doing certain things. So,
Let me get a little deeper on this with you.
sure.
Back when we founded this country, every country was a religious country, whether it was Henry VIII
Right.
or Catholics or whatever. And so there must have been something the founding fathers really saw, some real danger in that. Not just that it isn't a good idea. It's not a good idea within a diverse country to have a mix of church and state. Well, I think we all can see that. But they must have seen something absolutely horrifying about the idea of mixing church and state.
Yes, that's a terrific question. And I'll try to give as simple an answer as possible to it. So, if you look at the process by which some, not all, of the European colonists came to the Americas in the years before the American Revolution, some were coming because they were seeking religious freedom. They had lived under the Church of England and had been denied the right to worship as they saw fit. And so they came to America so that they could worship freely. So it was baked into the DNA of the founding of the country to worship freely. I would also invite attention to something that Thomas Jefferson said. Jefferson might be our most important founder on the subject of religious freedom and this wall between the state and the church. Jefferson in 1802 did use the word wall in a letter to the Danbury Baptist Association and said the wall of separation between church and state must remain, or something such as that. So he did use the word wall. Which leads to the question of why. And yes, he was very much aware of the history of settlers who had come to avoid the edicts of the Church of England, but it went deeper than that for Jefferson. He did not like the fact that Europe was full of countries that were religious in their orientation. He found corruption in the merger of the king, noble, priest model. If the king is in collusion with the noblemen, think high-ranking officials in the king's court, and the priests, and I'm not using the word priest in a particular religious tradition. I don't mean Catholics or any other particular denomination, but religious leaders. If there is a collusion, a cooperation among those three, then it very strongly risks silencing democracy, freedom of opinion, freedom of thought, all of those things that we hold dear in the First Amendment to the Constitution.
I want to go back for just 1 second here to have you clarify something or get your opinion on it. We talk about how the First Amendment was written and what it says, as opposed to why it's not. Here's the 5-point rule of what you're supposed to follow. Was it written in this slight vagueness or elasticity, as you called it, intentionally, or was it written that way with an understanding they thought we would perfectly understand what they were writing? Did they intend for it to be able to be changed and interpreted differently over time? What's your belief on that?
So I do think that I guess the first thing to say is that the writing in the First Amendment is not unlike the writing in other amendments or the Constitution or the Declaration, or any of our other founding documents. They're not typically prescriptive in here are the 5 things you must do and the 5 things you must not do. They're as much poetry as they are prose.
Right.
And I think that is part of why they have lasted, because they are so elegantly written and they do allow for change over time. So I do think that that was part of it. But I think that the founders, the architects of the Constitution, in the case of what we're talking about now, were not channeling their inner lawyers. They did not view the Constitution or the amendments as a legal brief that must parse out to the letter what must or must not be done. And I think that they did think that the American people were smart enough to know what Congress shall make no law means.
Mm-hmm. We are speaking with Nancy Beck Young about the history of separation of church and state. If you would like to join the conversation, you can call or text 713-440-8870. We do have a call on the line, Colby from Katy. Colby, welcome to Hello Houston. What is your comment or question for Dr. Young?
Hi, thank you. Dr. Young, not too long ago, the Glorious Way Church in Cyprus invited school board candidates to their service and brought them in front of the congregation, and their preacher endorsed them and then went so far to say as, I don't care what the IRS thinks, and he said he doesn't care about the Johnson Amendment. Is
Right.
the separation of church and state just fizzled out?
Thank you, Colby. Professor Young?
Yes. So that pastor and that church were very much, as you pointed out, in violation of the law. The Johnson Amendment, which was added to the tax code in the mid-1950s, 1954, I believe, authored by Texas's own Lyndon Johnson, just in case anybody out there is wondering who this guy named Johnson was, to prohibit non-profit organizations. And typically that involves churches and universities and charitable organizations from engaging in political advocacy. So I'm a university professor. I would never dream of telling my students who to vote for or discussing that at all in the classroom. I am not permitted to do that. Any political advocacy that I do as a university professor, I have to do on my own email account. I cannot use my uh.edu account for those matters, because I would be putting my employer and myself in great jeopardy, and I would not want to do that either to the university I love or to myself. So I can't do that. Likewise, preachers can't do that. They put their nonprofit tax exempt status at risk. And so this pastor can hold whatever views he likes. He cannot like the Johnson Amendment. I don't like the speed limit. But that means, if I get pulled over, I have to pay the ticket. And if charges were brought against that pastor, that church would have to deal with the consequences, because to me that sounds like a very clear violation of the Johnson Amendment to the tax code.
So, but we also saw that back in 2022 when the very prominent Second Baptist pastor Ed Young called for Democrats to be voted out during a sermon, and that made national news. I mean, it was quite a pivotal moment, and that was back in 2022. So, do you think that we're slowly getting more used to hearing this type of commentary from religious pastors and such?
I think it's happening more frequently. I don't think we should get used to it. It's very dangerous. It runs afoul of President Jefferson's king, noble, priest test. In this case, not a priest, but a pastor. But that's just not something preachers should be doing. One does not go to church, or one should not go to church to learn who to vote for. One should go to church to deepen one's faith in God or whatever entity one might worship, and to learn how to live a better life and be more accepting and loving for their fellow humans.
Well,
It should.
my last comment, all the Billingsleys came over here in 1640 as Quakers to get away from the Church of England. So I'm very strong on this subject.
Yes, absolutely. Nancy Beck Young is the Moores Professor of History and Director of the Center for Public History at the University of Houston. Professor Young, thank you for joining us today on Hello Houston.
Thank you for having me.